Hi all, Stingy Hat here, and today we're going to be talking about object pooling using Unity's relatively new object pool API. At the end of this tutorial, you're going to be able to do what you see here, which is create these bullets that come out of your object pool and are used in the object pool design pattern, I guess. As always, we'll get right into the code, which you can find in a paste bin in the description. If all you want to do is just get to how it's done, you can just take that and go. If you want to stick around, we'll talk about exactly what the code is doing and when you want to use this design pattern. Okay, so to get right into it here, we really have two pieces of code to make this work. On the one hand, we have the actual object pool itself. In this case, I'm calling it a bullet factory because I'm pooling bullets. And then we have code for the bullet and just basic bullet code. Obviously, you can pool any kind of object, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay, so part of my factory is I'm taking in a prefab of the thing I want to pool. And then there's really just a lot of boilerplate that's required with Unity's object pooling API. So I just have some code that's mostly to do with that. And we'll see what that looks like in a second. So in this first function, what this is doing is when I first call on projectiles pool, when I go to grab it, it's going to check to see if the pool has been created or not yet. And if it hasn't, then go ahead and create it. And this is really the core of the API. It takes in, so I do new object pool, the thing that I'm pooling, and then here it's taking a set of functions that fulfill these various things. So the first parameter is the function used for actually creating the pooled item. The second function is what to do when you take an item from the pool. The third function is a function for what happens when you return an item to the pool. Fourth function is what do you do when you destroy a pool object. And then these are just variables. So you can do collection checks, true or false. How big is the pool? And actually, let me see exactly what that. The default capacity and the max capacity. In my case, I made them both the same. And then once we've instantiated the pool, or if the pool already exists, then we return it. So this is kind of out of order here, but we'll look at what a function looks like to destroy the pooled object, which is pretty obvious. We're just going to call destroy, and that'll completely remove the game object. This is the same destroy you use whenever you're deleting a game object. But part of doing an object pool is this should really never happen. What happens when an object gets returned to the pool? So in this case, for a bullet, an object gets returned to the pool when, let's say, the bullet hits something or it times out. Like the bullet's gone far enough, I want to make sure it's, I'm going to basically say the bullet's done traveling. So what happens, I want to return it to the pool. So this is what happens when it returns to the pool. First of all, I'm going to set the bullet to not be active anymore. So that basically it's gone from the scene. It's still in memory though, which is part of what object pooling is all about, is keeping things in memory. And then I'm just, because of the nature of what I'm pooling, in this case I'm pooling bullets. So anytime you have a rigid body, so this is just to get this out of the way, this is sort of ancillary to actual object pooling. So this is specifically for bullets, this part here. So anytime you're dealing with an object with rigid body and you're deactivating it, and maybe you're going to set it active, you're going to reactivate it again somewhere else and use it again, you're going to want to do this. So this is basically setting the velocity and the angular velocity to 0. If I don't do that, then when I bring that, when I reactivate this bullet, when it comes back around and I grab it to use it somewhere else, it's going to carry over any velocity or angular velocity it has, and I don't want that, right? So we're setting it to 0 once it's being returned to the pool. And by being returned to the pool, I'm saying this bullet's done its thing. It's hit an object again, or it's timed out and I don't need it anymore in my scene. On take from pool, this is what happens when I'm grabbing an object, or an object has been grabbed from the pool. So see how I deactivated it here. When I'm taking it from a pool, I'm kind of assuming that if it's in the pool, it's deactive, and I'm just making it active at that point. To create a pooled item, so this is when the pool is empty, let's say, or there's not enough items in the pool that, and I need to make a new one. Like I'm requesting another bullet, but the pool doesn't have a bullet ready to give me because they're all active, or they're basically there just aren't enough bullets yet. So what's going to happen is a bullet's going to get instantiated from my prefab, and I'm just going to return it out. Return the basic bullet, the component of it. So on release here, so this is a function I have for on the bullet side. Basically, the bullet's going to tell the object pool when it's ready to be released, and we'll see what that looks like in a second. But basically, this is just saying, hey, project pool, this bullet's released, and that's when it's going to come around and do this like on return to pool stuff. So the rest of these, the last two functions here are more to do with shooting a bullet. So this is all like the really this is all the code for object pooling, and this is kind of boilerplate. A lot of your object pool code, if you're using Unity's object pool API, is going to look very similar to this. This stuff down here has more to do specifically with bullets, shooting some kind of projectile, or in my case, the projectile that I've designed for this tutorial. So this is sort of like the bare minimum of what you would see. So we already went over what happens for release bullet, and I'll show you where that gets called in a second. As far as do shooting, so this is just, first of all, I do projectiles pool.get, and that's going to grab a bullet from the object pool. If there is no bullet available to be grabbed from the object pool, it's going to create a new one. That's where we're going to see create pooled item will end up getting called. Otherwise, on take from pool. Okay, you get the picture. So I grab the bullet there. I'm setting the transform to where my factory is, where the rotation is. Now, typically, what I might do is I'd create a game object that's sort of like the end point of the gun where the bullets are going to come out of, let's say. You don't really want your bullets to come right out of the middle of your game object, right? You want them to come out of the end of the gun, and maybe a little further from that. It just makes things easier because then the bullet's not going to collide with your own game object and that kind of stuff, and you can avoid situations like that. In this case, again, this is sort of a bare minimum example. I don't care. But yeah, so I'm setting the position and the rotation of the bullet that's about to come out. I'm calling this function on the bullet, this shoot bullet function, and again, we'll see what that looks like in a second. Finally, in the fixed update, all I'm doing is getting an input so that every time I hit space, I'm going to shoot a new bullet. And just to make sure that a billion bullets don't come out, I have a little timer set up so that no more than one bullet will come out every half a second, I think it is, whatever I set the timer for. Okay, so that's the bullet factory. That's really the bulk of the object pool. Just to take a quick look at what a basic bullet looks like here. and really, this is truly as basic as can be. So we have that function shoot bullet. This is what we just saw gets called. This is basically telling the bullet, the bullet's already been placed on the screen. It's already been grabbed from the object pool, positioned and rotated the way we want it. And now I'm just saying, you're ready to shoot. And basically start going, basically. So part of that function is I'm giving it a direction and also just telling it who shot me. Or, who shot the bullet, that is to say, who shot me. And that, hey, guess what, you're ready to shoot. So just in an update function, if you're in the process of shooting or being shot, whatever you want to call it, basically if you're active, right? If you're an active bullet, I'm just going forward on the forward vector at a certain speed that we're set here. Here I'm checking for the bullet's lifetime. If it goes past the lifetime, then you're no longer shooting. And I'm critically here, I'm going back to my object pool, my bullet factory, and telling it to release the bullet. That's sort of the important bit here. And also, so this bullet actually doesn't collide with anything. This bullet will really only die at the end of its lifespan. Typically, you would do like an on collision enter, and you do the same thing. If it hits something, you're gonna do is shooting equals false and get that bullet factory or whatever your object pool is called and tell it to release it. That's also part of why, although I don't do anything with it here, why I'm taking in the shooter bullet, so that we can get that bullet factory component out of it and do the release. It's also helpful just to know if you're doing actual shooting things in your Unity project. It helps to know who shot the bullet. That way, in your collision detection, a common thing you're going to want to do is just make sure the thing that the bullet's colliding with is not the same game object that shot the bullet in the first place. You don't want to collide with your own bullet. I mean, unless you do, but that's why I was saying you want to make sure the bullet comes out of the end of the gun, not in the middle of the game object, that kind of thing. So it's a pretty typical thing, I would say, to, in your collision detection, check to make sure you're not the shooter of the bullet. Okay, so that's all the code, and I kind of did go over it more or less line by line, so I kind of explained everything that's going on here. Again, there's a paste bin in the description if you just want to see the code. You can get it that way. Let's talk about why you want to use an object pool and when you want to use an object pool. So why you want to use an object pool is because instantiating game objects and destroying game objects are very expensive operations. A lot of times we talk about optimization in your game project. And frankly, if you're using an engine like Unity and you're just an indie hobby developer like I am, optimization doesn't always matter all that much. Whatever it is you're doing, you're probably way under the threshold of whatever, nice computers exist today. However, when it comes to instantiating game objects and destroying game objects, that is, pulling things into memory and then removing things from memory, that's always going to be expensive. And even on rinky-dink little hobby projects like the stuff I do, you will feel a lot of instantiations. If you do a lot of instantiations, you will get a little stutter. You will see it in the frame rate. You will feel it. So that's why it's important to do object pooling, where we're not always instantiating. We're only instantiating when we need to, and then we're just deactivating and then reactivating from that same thing that's already been instantiated. So I'm not constantly swapping memory around, and we don't get that stutter. So when would you want to use object pooling? Well, as you can see here, bullets. Bullets are a very common time where you're going to use object pooling. Really, anything that you're going to do a lot of instantiating and potentially a lot of destroying of game objects. So any sort of temporary game objects. So bullets, as we've already seen, sometimes special effects. In a lot of cases, I'd use a design pattern of having a special effect manager. So rather than having, let's say, a particle effect on the game object itself that just gets called, or hidden or unhidden, or it presses play when something happens, when the appropriate action happens, what I like to do is have a special effects manager at a global level, at a game manager level. so outside of the particular object. And what I'll do is, let's say a bullet hits a wall. It'll then call the special effects manager and say, hey, I want such and such special effect, a special effect appropriate for having hit this wall. And then the special effects manager will place a special effect there and play it. And in that case, having that special effect be object pooled is another good idea. If I had infinite spawning enemies in a video game, I would use object pooling for those enemies. So that's kind of, I think you get the idea of when you want to use object pooling. As far as Unity's API for object pooling, I don't think it's the best. Like I said, there's a lot of boilerplate here, and to me, it's not super elegant. If you want to do a bare bones object pool, let's actually just show you what that would look like right now. Just create this. So prior to Unity's API for object pooling, this is how I did object pooling, and I think probably a lot of people did object pooling. So we would have something like this. Perfect. So we create the pool as a serializable field, and then in the inspector we would fill up that pool. And we do is this exposed? Let's do this. Sorry, this is all off the top of my head here, but why don't we like this? Oh, the add link. I was hoping it would do that for me. Okay. And just like that. So pretty similar to the other code, except with a lot less boilerplate. And part of what that boilerplate is doing is it's, there's code in here for creating the pooled item in the first place. There's sort of hooks for what to do when we're releasing projectiles back into the pool, returning it to the pool and all that. But I don't think you need to, I can handle the this part here of setting the object to false and setting the rigid velocity. You could handle all that on the bullet itself. And really all the object pool needs to do is make sure it can grab the next available object. This also doesn't take into account, in this case, if I grab more bullets than are available, you're just not going to shoot a bullet in this case. Whereas in this case, we will instantiate a new bullet and have that be available in the pool. So, I mean, maybe this is a little more robust. It's not a little more. It is more robust, the Unity's object pooling API. But in a pinch, this is a lot easier. And you can just make sure that your pool has enough projectiles, more than enough than you're going to need. So that's object pooling. Leave a like if you feel so inclined. If not, that's okay too. let me know if this was helpful to you, or if you have any questions about it, if you need something further explained. Again, as I said before, the code's all in a pastebin if you want to look at it. Pretty straightforward. Nothing crazy going on here. Thanks, and look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.